Okay. Okay. So hello, everybody, in person and virtual guests. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded indigenous lands. The Ganyenge Haka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Jojage, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And on that note, there's a rally in support of the Wet'suwet'en land defenders at Place Emile Gamla at 11 tomorrow morning.
Great. Thanks, Danielle. So my name is Sina Queyras, and I am the director of Writers Read, and I'm happy to have you here. And I am happy that the Dean of Arts and Science continues to fund the program. It's our 10th year, and I keep sort of touching in at the beginning of every event because it's remarkable to me that it's kind of been going this long, and we've had so many people that I've respected come through over the years: Lydia Davis, Claudia Rankine, Dion Brand, Gail Scott, Nicole Broussard, Renee Gladman, Lisa Robertson, Eileen Miles, just a phenomenal list. And also just like phenomenal rooms that we've been in, rooms full of people, kind of half empty rooms, hybrid rooms, and how remarkable it has been that we've all kind of keep adapting and transforming and, you know, kind of making all of these spaces work in really, really remarkable ways. So I just want to thank you people who are here in the audience and everybody who's come over the years and been part of the series, and those of you who return as well, because I saw some former students in the audience, and that's a fantastic kind of feeling, the way that it ripples out and the conversation carries out beyond your time here, you students. So today's guest is Lauren Elkin, writer, translator, most recently of the author of number 9192, A Diary of a Year on the Bus, and the UK translator of Simone de Beauvoir's previously unpublished novel, The Inseparables. She's the author of Flâneuse, Women Walk the City, a finalist for the 2018 Penn Diamonstein Spielvogel Award for the Art of the Essay, New York Times Editor's Choice and Notable Books of 2017, Radio 4 Book of the Week, and Best Book of 2016 from The Guardian, The Financial Times, The New Statesman, and The Observer. Elkin is currently working on 3 books: Art Monsters, Beauty in Excess, a biography of Gertrude Stein for Yale University Press, and a novel, Scaffolding, that I hope we can talk about a bit later. And I just want to mention too that she holds a PhD in English from the City University of New York, Université de Paris, and a Master's of Philosophy in French from the Sorbonne, and that she has taught literature and creative writing at New York University, the American University of Paris, the University of Liverpool, and the University de Paris, Denis Diderot. And now I'm going to turn you over to Danielle Bobker.
Hi. So I teach in the English department at Concordia. And full disclosure, I'm Sina's partner. So we are excited to be talking to you together today. And since Elkin, since you are so prolific, there you are, and write in so many different modes, we have asked you to take us on a tour through your recent projects, and maybe if you want some of your ongoing ones. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes, 15-20 minutes talking about Elkin's translation of The Inseparables, a novella by Simone de Beauvoir, published by Penguin Vintage in September, this past September. And then we'll talk about number 9192, A Diary of the Year on the Bus, that Elkin published with semiotext in the same month. And then we'll have some time for discussion about current writing projects, how Elkin moves between various literary modes, and her paths and practices as a writer, and time for questions if you have any. So we'll start with The Inseparables. And I think maybe just to get us started, can I ask you, Lauren, to take us into the book, tell us about what happens in it, and read to us from your beautiful translation.
Oh, thank you. First of all, thank you both so much for having me. Thank you, Sina, for inviting me, and Writers Read for hosting, and Danielle for emceeing. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And I'm, God, so flattered to be appearing in this long line of people that you just cited, who are all my heroes and heroines. So yeah, this is pretty fantastic. I visited Concordia many years ago. I think it was my first conference ever in like 2001 maybe. And it was really incredible. I think I was talking about June Barnes. I'm pretty sure that would have been what I was working on back then. I think I saw Irene Gamel speak. I'm not sure if she teaches at Concordia or somewhere else in Montreal, but she's a great modernist feminist scholar. Anyway, so the Inseparables, this is the galley edition, so it looks different from the finished version. This is a novel that Beauvoir wrote. Well, it's a version of a fictionalized version of her friendship with her best friend from childhood, whose real name in real life was Elisabeth Lacroix. She went by Zaza, or rather Beauvoir nicknames her Zaza in order to give her a kind of fictional existence in her memoirs. And Beauvoir tried to write this story several times in her life. It stuck with her because they were dear friends from a very young age, and then Zaza very tragically died at the age of 21, but of some sort of mysterious ailment. It was maybe encephalitis, meningitis, a weird virus that just came through. They didn't really have the medical capabilities at that time, in the early 20s or the late 20s, sorry, to really figure out exactly what it was that killed her in the end. But Beauvoir was haunted by this death for the rest of her life, and she would say famously at the end of her memoirs that she felt that she had bought her own freedom with Zaza's death. So the Inseparables really looks back to the story of their friendship, the sort of circumstances in which they were both raised in very bourgeois Catholic Parisian families. In this, they meet, I think, probably, late 19 teens. I think the First World War has just come to an end when they meet, or maybe it's about to end. So like say 1918 is where the story really begins. And yeah, it's one of many attempts that Beauvoir made to tell the story of how they met, how they became friends, what their friendship consisted of, and what happened to Zaza, and who Beauvoir blamed for it. And she wrote this, I think this version in 1954, soon after she'd finished the Mandarins, which she would win the Prix Goncourt for later that year. And she showed it to Sartre, her companion, who she reports held his nose after he read it. She said, "What do you think?" And he was like, "Ooh." And so she thought perhaps it wasn't worth publishing, and she kind of put it aside. And then many years after her death, her adopted daughter, Sylvie Le Bon de Beauvoir, was preparing the complete works of Simone de Beauvoir for a very prestigious Parisian publisher called the Pléiade, and wanted to include the Inseparables, which didn't have a title at that time, in the publication, and was told that it was too long to fit in because it was unpublished and it didn't seem important enough to the editors of that work to include. And she wanted to include it as an appendix, but it was too long to be an appendix. So she found another publisher for it who brought it out in French, I think last year, fall of 2020. And then the rights sold all around the world. And the American publisher who acquired it asked me to do a translation sample, as well as I think at least one other person. And then in the end preferred the other translator sample, but the UK publisher preferred my translation. So we've actually ended up with two different translations of this previously never before, published, much less translated into English book. So I think, it will be an interesting job for someone, probably an academic, to look at the two translations and, see the choices that we made and think about how that helps us or doesn't help us read the text. But for today, I'm very happy to read a bit of my own translation, and to talk to you guys about what's happening in this book and why it's an important book for us to know about. So I'll begin with the very beginning, and then there is a part from later on that if you want, I'll read maybe a bit into our conversation because it might make more sense at that point. So this is chapter 1. When I was 9 years old, I was a good little girl, though this hadn't always been the case. As a small child, the adult's tyranny caused me to throw such tantrums that one of my aunts declared quite seriously, "Sylvie is possessed by a demon." War and religion tamed me. Right away, I demonstrated perfect patriotism by stomping all over my doll because she was made in Germany, though I didn't really care for her to begin with. I was taught that God would protect France only if I were obedient and pious. There was no escaping it. The other girls and I would walk through the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur, waving banners and singing. I began to pray frequently, and I developed a real taste for it. Abbé Dominique, the chaplain at the Collège Adélaïde, where we went to school, encouraged my ardor. Dressed all in tulle with a bonnet made of Irish lace, I made my first communion, and from that day forward, I set a perfect example for my little sisters. Heaven heard my prayers, and my father was appointed to a desk job at the Ministry of War because of his heart trouble. That morning, I was especially excited because it was the first day of school. I couldn't wait to get back to the classroom, solemn as a mass. The silence in the hallways, the softened smiles of the teachers in their long skirts and their high-necked blouses, who were often dressed as nurses, since the school had been partially turned into a hospital. Under their white veils with red stains, they resembled saints, and I was overcome when they pressed me to their bosoms. I wolfed down the soup and gray bread which had replaced the hot chocolate and brioche from the pre-war days, and impatiently waited for my mother to finish dressing my sisters. Okay, then I'll skip ahead. She gets to school. It's the first day of school. She's very happy to be back there. And when the bell rang, I entered the classroom they called Sainte Marguerite. All the rooms looked the same. The students sat around an oval table covered in black moleskin, which would be presided over by our teacher. Our mothers sat behind us and kept watch while knitting balaclavas. I went over to my stool and saw the one next to it was occupied by a hollow-cheeked little girl with brown hair whom I didn't recognize. She looked very young, her serious, shining eyes focused on me with intensity. "So you're the best student in the class." "I'm Sylvie Lepage," I said. "What's your name?" "André Gallard. I'm 9. If I look younger, it's because I got burned alive and didn't grow much after that. I had to stop studying for a year, but Maman wants me to catch up on what I missed. Can you lend me your notebooks from last year?" "Yes," I said. André's confidence and rapid, precise speech unnerved me. She looked me over warily. "That girl said you're the best student in the class," she said, tilting her head a little at Lisette. "Is that true?" "I often come in first," I said, modest. I stared at André with her dark hair falling straight down around her face and an ink spot on her chin. It's not every day that you meet a little girl who's been burned alive.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about about your favorite moments when translating this book. Like, so I did actually to declare. You said you decided to put off reading the passage about the purse.
Oh, I can read it. I can read it.
You paused there because I was kind of hoping to think with you a little bit about what's so wonderful about that passage.
Oh, let's do it. I don't have to put it off.
Well, and because it is my favorite passage of the novel. So I wanted to think a little bit about it together. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. So this is from a bit later on once the two girls are friends. And I believe it's André's birthday. She's turning 13. And Sylvie wants to find a way to express how much she loves and admires her friend. So she decided to make her a little handbag. So I decided to make André a handbag, following a pattern in La Mode Pratique, which I was determined would be the height of luxury. I chose red and blue silk with a shimmering, thick gold brocade, which in my eyes was as beautiful as a fairy tale, and assembled it on a woven wicker frame I made myself. I hated to sew, but I worked so assiduously that when the little purse was finished, it looked truly beautiful, with its cherry-colored satin lining and its pleats. I wrapped it in tissue paper, laid it in a box, and tied it with a ribbon.
Yeah, and I love that passage and how it goes on when she, when André opens up the box and receives it and blushes, right? And you read that passage to me earlier from the Memoir de Geneviève, where she talks about that same moment in French. And then Madame Gallard goes on so André's mother says to Sylvie just after this, I'm sure her mother helped her make it or something like that. Like, it's not just a gift from Sylvie. Anyway, I wanted to talk about this passage. I wanted to start talking about this passage. For me, it is one of my favorite in the book. It's so economical, like so much happens so quickly. And it's like the passage itself is like an elegant little purse. And I think of the whole novel as like an elegant little purse. I think it's one of I don't know if you agree with me, but it's like one of the moments where the friends, Sylvie and André, it might actually be one of the heights of shared feeling. Like, the irony of the title is that these girls who are known as les Inseparables are actually divided and have all kinds of distances that they have to navigate and ultimately don't necessarily want to navigate in the same ways, right? But in this moment, they really are. I feel like they really do come together. André understands what it is that Sylvie has given her this purse, what it means. And then the way the mothers, interact around this, like Sylvie's mother is kind of into her making the purse, but André's mother is a little wary, right? And so I love everything that's packed into this little moment. And also, one final thing, I think the symbolism, and this is going to kind of get us to some of the other themes that we want to maybe talk about in a few minutes, but the sexual symbolism, the choice of this little purse that's lined with silk. And maybe because I've read red silk, right? I've read like 18th century pornography. Like there's, this is like a little yonic offering from Sylvie to her friend. So yeah, this is one of my favorite moments. And I wanted to ask sort of a question. First question to you is like, what are your favorite moments? What are the special joys and challenges of translating this novella for you?
Yeah, this was absolutely one of my favorite moments. I think there are not a lot of moments in the text where the two girls come together this way and have this kind of shared feeling. I think that the kind of overall affective register of the novel is Sylvie adores André, and André is we can't access her somehow. She's at some kind of remove. And we're very much with Sylvie in her mind, and anything that we know about André is she either, she says it to Sylvie, or Sylvie is kind of interpreting what she sees going on around her, especially, when she visits André's house and sees how her family works. But there's another moment in the book where they come together, and that's a few years later when they're a bit older, and Sylvie is visiting André's family home in the southwest of France. And André takes her downstairs, upstairs, downstairs. This is a very fancy house. And so this is downstairs to the kitchen, and the stores where like all of the like tinned food and all the jams and all of the liqueurs and all of the like cooking equipment and all of the serving equipment is kept. And Sylvie is just incredibly impressed by all of the accessories and things, like just the paraphernalia that is actually involved in high society that comes to rest here, below ground, below stairs. And Sylvie can't imagine the dinner parties for which she would need all of these different kinds of tureens and, gravy boats and plates and cutlery. It's staggering. And translating that was really one of my favorite parts, because Beauvoir is calling on, this arcane vocabulary, stuff that I myself had not necessarily come across in my life in 21st century Paris. And so had to, go looking up to figure out what it meant in English and how to render it. And then there are moments where I would keep something in French because, the English equivalent was like so obscure that no one would know what it meant, or it was close enough to the French. So I was really in that section trying to listen to the way that it sounded when I read it out loud. I wanted it to sound like a cacophony of things and textures and surfaces. So I had a lot of fun translating that passage. And that's sort of why I said at the outset it would be interesting to look at how, I mean, I don't want to do it because the work is too intimate to me to see how someone else translated it, but I'd be curious to know what she did in those passages, if she's rendering it, for sense or for like another kind of sense, another kind of sound.
It's a complicated relationship to all that stuff, though, isn't it, for Sylvie? Because it's so beautiful and intriguing and and exotic, I guess. But she can also think, right, unless I'm projecting ahead, I think she senses right away how oppressive it is.
Yes.
Have to try to figure out how to manage all of this stuff and what, do you put the cherries in brandy or do you put the cherries in wine for dessert on a certain occasion? Like all of those rituals that that are so intricately mapped out. Trying to figure it out
completely. And I mean, socially, it's a really interesting moment because they're, it seems from the outset, I mean, both of these girls go to the same like Catholic private school. You'd think, how different could their families and their social standing be? And then you have a scene like that where Beauvoir is really illustrating the like vast differences between, sort of lower upper middle class girl and a seriously upper middle class, like bordering on aristocracy girl.
I guess one of her trajectories is coming to realize the benefits of her father, of the brokenness of the family, how that liberates from all of that stuff.
Exactly.
The thing, so I realize we probably have very limited amount of time, but the thing I really want to get to with you is to think about like why now? What the problematic of this novel is for current readers. And is it fair to call it a lesbian tragedy, as Paul Preciado has done? So just to kind of flesh this out, Beauvoir says that a novel is a problematic because for her, like philosophy and literature and life are also intermingled, because the job of fiction is to take the reader into these existential questions and not answer, give us a chance to be inside of it, right? Inside these questions about how to live, how to be yourself, how to navigate the situations that you're faced with, like the conditions of your life. So in Preciado's reading, which I understand is somewhat controversial, the title of the review is La Deuxième Sexualité, right? Which is like an allusion to and a riff on Simone de Beauvoir's like central contribution to feminist philosophy, the second sex, which offers us this, the idea that lays out for us how gender is socially constructed. That little catchphrase, one is not born but made a woman, right? But by Preciado thinking about this novel as a kind of, in putting it in conversation with the second sex, but saying this is the second sexuality, he's asking us to think about a kind of new version of that catchphrase, like one is not born but made a heterosexual, right? Pointing to the social constructedness of heterosexuality, that one of the conditions in which we have to find ourselves and become ourselves is not just this gender, but heteronormativity. So by saying that we should read this book this way, he's hoping, like, I think part of it, it's a little bit provocative and kind of satirical, I think, on purpose, the way that he's framed it, but he's trying to take Beauvoir definitively out of the shadows of Jean-Paul Sartre and to provide a foundation, I think, for seeing her, saying this book is a place from which we now can see Beauvoir as the pansexual, like polyamorous pansexual person that she always was, but there was like kind of harder to, that aspect of her philosophy and her fiction has been harder to see. So I don't know. I think I mentioned to Lauren before the talk that I had a chance to talk about this book with Beauvoir scholars, and we didn't quite get into this, but I noted that there was a kind of real absence of discussion of the queerness of the book, and it felt like a loss. So this,
So
just,
and I had the occasion to. Yeah, I think you're so completely, that's such a good reading of the Preciado essay, which I've also read and was very impressed by and think was very important for the reasons that you outline. And I recently was in conversation with some Beauvoir scholars as well, and the queer issue did crop up at my request. I had said I really want to talk about this. This is, what I think, one of the big things to take from this novel. And it was basically suggested that my reading was anachronistic. And I was like, okay, we're just going to move on because there's too many of us to get into this. But like, I really, either I want to write about this or someone's going to write about this, because like, it's the novel has just come out, and it had this controversial kind of reading in France as a result of Preciado's essay in Libération, but it risks at this moment that it's just come out in English, falling into the category of like, oh, female friendship is so nice. We love being friends with each other. And that's important too. Like, don't get me wrong, but like, there are some very real, either encoded or like blatant kind of references and symbolism, as you say, and kind of vibes that this book is engaging with or giving off. And we ignore them, not just at our peril, but like at the risk of reducing Beauvoir's understanding of sexuality to the same, as you say, little heterosexual narrative about being Jean-Paul Sartre's mistress, that we've been telling for years, and our own understanding of what queerness is and what relationships between women can be when permitted to become what they must be or what they want to be. So I think, I have a couple of observations about that. I mean, Beauvoir in The Second Sex says that the lesbian, as she calls her, is not characterized by her preference for women, but by the exclusiveness of this preference. So I think that word lesbian tends to send, like Sylvie Le Bon de Beauvoir, when she read Preciado's essay, like lost her shit and was like, she's not a lesbian. And it's like, okay, fine. So maybe we won't use that word because, because of what Beauvoir had to say about lesbians, and because, Sylvie Le Bon de Beauvoir, who by the way was Beauvoir's like
Probably love it.
touchy-feely friend, let's put it that way, if she doesn't like that word. Deirdre Bair writes about in Parisian Lives her interviews with Beauvoir and with her daughter, and Beauvoir said, we're not lesbians, we don't do anything beneath the waist. So it's, clearly like the term just triggers something in these women that they don't want to deal with. So okay, so let's think about, maybe what's happening above the waist as like clearly and arguably something like difficult to classify, and I think, from my perspective, like could be classified under the heading of, Eve Sedgwick's definition of queerness as like openness and ambiguity, and what I have the quote somewhere, something to do with like lapses and excesses and things, energies that are difficult to channel into the sort of official kind of channels or overspill those official channels. In any case, my kind of understanding of the queerness of this text is not about classifying what Beauvoir was or what André was and saying, this is a lesbian story, but it's about same-sex desire in the sense that it is sort of, I don't know, in a state of becomingness in this friendship, and can't be kind of pinned down to to things happening below the waist or to sexuality. It doesn't take a physical form, but that doesn't mean that it's not there.
Yeah. And in any case, the book, I mean, whether or not it's like consummated, like the desires are clearly distinct from each other. Like their relationship isn't fully parallel, like their feelings for each other are not parallel. That's part of the explicit theme of the book, that Sylvie doesn't feel reciprocated or seen, and when she gives the purse, like, I think she might kiss me if I give her the purse.
Yeah, exactly. Another little note about the
imagination.
The purse scene in the memoirs, that she gives it to her in a closet. Like, again, we don't want to be anachronistic and use our terminology, but like it happens in some kind of enclosed space that's off away from everyone else. And not it's, sorry?
not with the mothers. The mothers aren't looking on.
Yeah, the mothers aren't there.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, that's
so in the memoirs, it's like a private moment between the two of them. And, you know, as I read to you before, like the blood rises in Andre's cheeks and they're embarrassed by the emotion they feel. And it's like this moment where they can't find language for what they want to say. You know, they don't have language, hasn't been given to them, or they don't know. They're very young, obviously. But then in Deirdre Bair's biography of Beauvoir, Beauvoir's story when she's, you know, in her late 70s at the end of her life, is that actually the way to read what happened there is that it was a major faux pas on her own part, that she gave a gift to Zaza, and that Zaza was shocked, and Zaza herself, apparently in real life, condemned what Beauvoir had done and giving her this present, that it was like too much, that it was excessive, that it was a signal of too much feeling, that wasn't, she was like, in her milieu, you didn't give presents like that. And that the reason that Zaza's mother then took against Beauvoir was because she had committed this social faux pas. But that, I don't believe her necessarily. I think it's a rewriting, you know.
It almost, I mean, it still doesn't matter, because I mean, in one, you know, this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to Sina to talk about number 91, 92. But as I'm going to say, I mean, for me, the contemporaneity of the book has to do with that. Like it's a, you know, these stories of female friendship, one of the common themes in contemporary popular culture is like friendships where it's like a queer woman and a straight woman. Like that's, you know, that paradigm. This could easily be turned into a 2 or 5 part TV series on that theme, you know. You know, it works for our time in that way. And I think it's kind of odd to want Beauvoir to be something fixed historically, since she was, even during her life, like a screen for feminist projection and other projection, right? About these issues. Like she's still becoming, and we can, you know, she can be the Beauvoir that we need now. I think that's what Preciado is trying to tell us, you know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And these homophobic, like tremendous homophobic limitations, like were part of her own struggle to be free, and like
exactly,
because we don't share them anymore, so we can do something different, you know, with the story. Anyway, so thank you so very much. That was really,
of course, thank you.
So now I'm going to let Sina talk to you about 91.
Well, it's okay, but I was just so intrigued by your discussion. I was ready to let that go on and on. But yeah, I guess we should shift gears a little bit, because there's also this book that we have. And this book is a year-long diary of writing a particular bus through Paris. And I guess we could talk a little bit about just the origin story of the book. I know that I read somewhere that you, this sort of origins of this book come out of your book, The Flâneuse, because you used some of the money to buy the iPhone that gave you access to the Notes app, that then gave you, I guess, the idea to take notes on the bus, right? But I just love the idea that one project led to another project, and it really does, because there's such overlap too in what's going on in the books. I also love that, thinking about a new kind of flânerie, a new kind of technology, use of writing, and this idea, you know, your long history with an interest of Oulipo and Perec's, you know, attempt at exhausting a place, and just sort of how this, you know, came. Like, did it begin? Like, how precisely did the project begin? I guess we can start there.
Yeah, well, I love that you build the bridge between Flâneuse and this book, because I keep trying to find the metaphor to describe it. I think I reach for like, I'm so bad at this, I'm so sorry, but who's that, like the like bird Roadrunner that like runs off the cliff, because there's like so much energy behind it, they're like kind of running in midair before the fall. I felt like I had just finished Flâneuse when I started this project, and it's like I was in overdrive, like observing the city, you know, because I trained myself to do it in a very particular way for that book, and I was like still doing it even though I wasn't writing the book anymore. So I think, I mean I have a tendency to keep journals, and I have for a very long time, and now, you know, it's in my Notes app, but I think the kind of like impulse to write down everything that I was seeing around me came directly from Flâneuse. So yeah,
Right.
there's this one moment on the bus early in that academic year. I was teaching at the American University of Paris and commuting via two buses, the 91 to the 92, from where I lived in the 5th to where the university is in the 7th. And I happened to see a sticker on the wall that said, "Your telephone is precious. Be vigilant when using it," meaning, be careful of pickpockets.
Right.
And I was like, yes, my telephone is precious. Like, it was very expensive. I'd like never spent that much money on really anything before.
Mm.
And so I thought, I will be vigilant. I will use it to carry out a vigil. I'll use it as like a way, instead of like losing myself in, the social media world of the phone. I will use it as a kind of camera to look at the people on the bus and look at, Paris and that particular part of time. I was also really sensitive, having just written Flânez, to the way that Paris tends to get narrativized as this museum city, this, city of myth and champagne and macarons, and like in a way that I don't think does Paris, the city, any favors, although maybe it brings in a lot of tourist revenue. But for people who live in the city, I think it's insulting to reduce it to that kind of Emily in Paris, playground, when it is very much, a place that can be very challenging to live, with very serious class and racial inequalities, and different kinds of people who live there who need different things from it. And riding the bus, the bus that I was taking, you did see a lot of different kinds of people, but it is still the left bank, which is still kind of more middle class and more, it's not as diverse as, say, if I'd been riding a bus across like the 10th arrondissement of Paris. So going from the 5th to the 7th, you definitely see a certain kind of person. And I was very aware of the fact that I was looking at, a pretty middle class version of Paris, even though it's public transported, and in theory, it's a very kind of open place to observe.
I mean, the book is structured sort of in these two kind of wings, right? With this like middle, this kind of like absence, in which, of course, events happen, including the Charlie Hebdo event. So the text, like, they're very different, actually. The second half starts like with this, the kind of more intense relationship of the self all of a sudden, and like it's kind of terror, kind of fearful, right? Obviously, you're trying to, the speaker is trying to process. Did you have a different? Was there a different? Like, had you decided already you were going to do the year, and so then you came back after the event, sort of renewed to kind of do this project, or is it just that we're seeing this evolution that happened, and then you ended up at the end of the year with the project? And also, like, did you feel it seems like a huge change happened in the second half, which
definitely. Yeah, it wasn't a project when I was doing it. It was just like what I did in the morning. I have a friend, she's a poet, her name is Jennifer Dick. And she was a good friend of mine, like early in the Paris days, and then she moved to Mulhouse in Alsace, and I haven't seen her in a long time. But I remember her telling me early on in our friendship that she, every morning before she taught, she would get there early and like journal before the students arrived. And there was something about clearing the space in her mind to like focus on what she had to talk about in class that day, that journaling, enabled for her. And so I was kind of thinking about, I think what Jen said in the decision to start keeping this bus journal every day. So it was a sort of like writing exercise or teaching exercise to focus myself and to kind of, mull over whatever I was thinking about teaching. Oh, hello, this is Julian. Mommy's talking to some people. Look, Mommy's in a meeting. Say hi. No. Say hi. Do you want to say hi? But I'm talking. Sorry, baby. I'll be done soon. I'll be done very soon. He's 3, and has opinions. I'll be back soon, baby. Poor guy. So yeah, it really it was much later that I decided that there was enough there. And obviously once the Charlie Hebdo attacks had happened, and I had the ectopic pregnancy in the second half, in the second semester, and once all that had happened, then I started feeling like, oh, there maybe was an interesting arc to this year. Like maybe I should try putting all of those bits together and see what they add up to. And initially I didn't think that it added up to much because, you know, the feedback that I got from some people I showed it to was like, meh.
Well, yeah, I mean, but it's such an interesting artifact because it really, like, I remember that moment very specifically when the iPhone sort of became a compositional tool, right? It was a very specific moment. And I also had, it was great with your son roaming in, because I had a similar moment where all of a sudden we had twins. And I was like, where am I going to write? How am I going to write? And then I got this iPhone and this app, and I found myself sort of trying to push through the city with my forearm steering it while I was right. But it allowed me to continue a writing practice. So I guess I guess it's a document that really kind of encapsulates almost the limits of what that's possible, right, in that moment, because they're often very brief. And it's like the events of the city. And there's that wonderful line in your introduction where you're like, you can't just right click on somebody and have their history, right? When you're on the bus with them. So you have to like interact, and you have to try to find a way to quickly kind of encapsulate what's going on. And speaking of that, my favorite page, of course, because I love how your writing projects are coming through here. My favorite page, I think, is 37, where and maybe you can just read that. Do you want to read that or just talk about
tell me what date it is, because I have a different edition. This is the UK edition.
Okay, it's Monday afternoon, 10/27/14.
10/27. Baby's crying. Okay, Monday afternoon, 10/27/14.
Yeah.
Okay, Monday afternoon, reading the years, and this quote is good for that Zadie article I have to write. Quote, the omnibus in which she had come, with its silent passengers looking cadaverous in the blue light, had already vanished, end quote. Wolf's usually so humanizing to the people in public transport, but this sounds like she's been reading The Wasteland. I had not thought death had undone so many. Zadie is much more human about the people on the bus, much more Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Brown. All novels start with an old lady in the carriage opposite. Something's jiggling my arm, jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. I look down. It's the child in the seat next to me, tapping away on a little red BlackBerry. I assume it's a game he's playing. I can't really tell. The sunlight makes a glare on his screen. How old is he? Not more than 9?
Yeah, I mean, I love that passage because you can just read it and think, oh, you know, like it's, you know, just a few thoughts, but it's actually so historical. Like I just went zooming back to, you know, Wolf riding through, which you talk about in the Flaneuse, that beautiful chapter on Bloomsbury with Wolf riding the bus with Vanessa on the top, you know, and then the whole essay, the Bennett and Brown, and then your whole thinking about Zadie Smith and all this stuff. So I just, yeah, it's like they're little kind of knots and like condensed little kind of nuggets of things that I can now go and do the research on this and find that you did finish the essay on Zadie Smith, you know, and like where, right? Just talk a little bit about that, the flavor of that as a writing project. Yeah, well, so it's funny that you should choose this passage, because I read this bit for a different event I did, I can't remember who with, and a friend texted me and she hadn't read the book yet, and she was like, oh, I can't wait to read your book. I didn't know you wrote about Annie Ernaux. And I was like, what is she talking about? I don't think I mentioned Annie Ernaux. And I was like, oh, the years, she means the years. And obviously, you know, it's not obvious, but this book is like an homage to Annie Ernaux. I don't name her because I felt like overkill. It felt like over-interpreting or over-reading my book to say that, you know, this book was inspired by Annie Ernaux. I wasn't teaching her that semester, so I just let, you know, the Perec stuff stand in. But her Exteriors, which was just published by Fitzcarraldo in Tanya Leslie's translation, has just come out. And that is a series of like journal entries basically that she wrote on the commuter train in Paris and in the supermarket and in parking lots. So, you know, the years, the Annie Ernaux book had not come out yet in the UK, and nobody was talking about it. You know, it was, I don't even know if it was out in English yet at this point, maybe, but I'd read it, but I wasn't teaching it and I wasn't thinking about it in conjunction with my work. But Annie Ernaux's Exteriors and her outside journals, those very much were on my mind. Oh, it's great. I didn't get that either, but I also love
Yeah.
Annie Arundel, and I can't wait for that book.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is actually a good time to segue into the larger
Yeah.
question that we have.
Yeah, sure.
Because we are in a writing program in an English department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, our department brings together academic and creative practices. And so we wanted to, think a little bit about how these two projects fit together into your career, your writing path. And, so our opening question on that topic has to do with your training. So you did a PhD in literature at CUNY and Université de Paris at this, is it like?
It's a joint, it's a co-teaching.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've taught in numerous academic settings. So can you talk to us about how training as an academic has prepared you for your writing career, informed your writing? What's the relationship between your practice and that?
That's a really nice question. Yeah, it's funny because there have been times when I felt like my writing practice is working against my academic training, and that I've had to kind of let it go a bit. And some people who've read 91, 92 have said, like, it feels like you're setting yourself free in this book from something. Like, they weren't talking about academia specifically. They're like, it feels like such a freeing book to have written. And in retrospect, it totally was, because Flâneuse was the like obedient, it's not an academic book. There's a lot of personal stuff and I guess creative writing in there that would never fly in an academic setting. But I had just finished my PhD when I started writing it. And it's very much underpinned by like, I am a researcher, man, and you are going to get some research. So, there's like the introduction and then various chapters which explore different facets of my argument and hopefully convince the reader at the end that what I'm saying is a thing. It's fully footnoted. There's a real sense of like, I have thought about these things and it's documented, and I'm in conversation with lots of other people who've thought about them. And that, side note, is something that drives me crazy about mainstream, quote unquote, non-academic publications, is that often the editor has decided you don't need an index and you don't need a bibliography or footnotes. And you're left going, where did you get that from? Like, where did you come up with that? Did you read something that you liked? Like, it feels borderline plagiarist a lot of the time. So I feel, because I come out of an academic training where you are in conversation with, there is, obviously you're doing individual work sometimes, but it's still, there's a feeling of a collective, of a field, a discipline that has a certain history, and that you are just one part of. That is still deeply, deeply important to me as a writer. And, in the Art Monsters book that I'm writing now, it's thoroughly footnoted and has a bibliography, and there will, mark my words, there will be an index. You will be able to say, where does she talk about Beauvoir, and find the page. Because there are other people who are going to want to work, hopefully, with what you're producing, and you need to help them do that. So I think, there's the extent to which I am married to this idea of there being a kind of scholarly apparatus in the work that I do, and I think that it should be there for other people too. That said, there are books like 91, 92, and there's an element of Art Monsters where I'm trying to let go of the kind of voice in my head, the angel in my house who's like telling me, you have to cite, cross-reference this way and that way, and you end up with a paragraph that's like, you have your original idea in it, but there's so much other stuff in there that the person reading it really has to commit to reading it in a very linear and thoughtful fashion, whereas the freedoms that you can get from non-academic publishing can be, if it's your original idea, you just say it. You can kind of speak in a piece the way that I'm speaking to you now, hopefully in a more eloquent and more organized fashion, but the piece can be more voice driven, still argument driven, still thoughtful, still referencing people, perhaps in footnotes, still engaged with a body of work, but it can be more about it's more led by a kind of train of thought or a narrative line that may or may not be argumentative. So I mean, these are like the issues that I struggle with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like this idea of the propulsion, right, that you talked about after the flaneuse, right? I mean, I think, like, and we could talk about Woolf, like we'd talk probably another hour of talking about Woolf, but I mean, she comes up in this passage, she comes up again and again in your work. And she comes up for me thinking about, you know, like, what is it that you're like breaking your constraint, right? I mean, you've come out of like writing about Oulipo, I mean, you're talking about this flânerie where there are rules, the psychogeography, there's these rules, there's these constraints, there's so many constraints, right? And so, yeah, there's in Woolf, you know, Woolf can be, Room of One's Own is so fluid and she's just talking, and it's all, you know, it's because she's been writing about them for 15, 20 years. She's written all the essays already, right? So there's this kind of sense of propulsion that happens. And also, I think just similarly want to think about, I don't know what your novel's about, but the sense in which, you know, you do the indexed work to then, you do that work to then have this experience of release in the kind of creative way. Or do you think of it that way?
Oh God, completely. Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful way to think of it. And it's hard in a work like Art Monsters, which is really trying to sit in two chairs at the same time.
Right.
And even, I mean, because it is coming out with a mainstream, I keep putting that in scare quotes, but, you know, a non-academic like trade publisher, you know, that's going to sell the book and try to make money from it. I have to fulfill certain expectations that they have for narrative. They want it to be a narrative work of nonfiction. That's the terminology. And so, you know, you can be hard put to find a narrative that meets their definition of what a narrative is, when your idea of it is this like propulsive thing or something more scholarly or some combination of the two. So I'm at the point in my revisions now, I'm trying to like, you know, retroactively like create some kind of narrative. But I did that with Flaneuse as well. That was also a case of like, I knew who I wanted to talk about, and then I had to find some elements of my life to like build something resembling a through line. And that was like one of the last things that I did.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about Art Monsters, and you call it a part of a feminist manifesto, but I'm just going to put it out there and stop for a second and see if people have questions, because we only have 5 minutes left. So I don't want to, do people have a venue for asking questions, or
Can.
do Olga, Bridget, do you guys have any questions that you want to? You do? Okay. Do you want to come? Does Bridget have to come around here?
Well, I don't know. So
or no, you say it and I'll repeat it. It's up to you.
Come up here, try it.
It's long? Okay. Yeah, Bridget wrote her question on the phone, on her phone.
Okay.
Amazing.
Can you hear her?
Take your mask off, maybe.
Oh,
we'll put ours
okay
on,
with
and
it.
you take your mask off.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you? Okay, go ahead then.
Yeah. So you mentioned about the Inseparables, your attention to how the translation sounded, like back to the cacophony of like the kitchen things, and the way that translation can render for like sense and sound, in addition to exactness, I guess. And so that struck me, because usually you see that kind of close attention to poetry rather than fiction. And so I wanted to ask about that, like how you translate how a sentence or a phrase sounds, like how you translate its texture, like in French, and how that, or if there are like any examples where that sound is especially clear between the French and the English, or if there are places where it completely diverges. The sound in English is completely like different, and how you.
That's a great question.
Yeah, really good question. I'm trying to think of examples from the Inseparables.
Can I give an example that might be
good?
Yeah.
Sure.
What about the part where like the appeal of Andre is described as she gets shivers from hearing the words peach and orchid? When I read that in English, I thought that those sound like way better in French. They don't give you shivers in English, really. I don't know. I don't know if that I don't know if that is exactly a phrase from your. I don't know if I'm remembering your translation or the other one. So
yeah, I mean, I can't remember what I wrote exactly, but it's something like that. Yeah, I think that's an interesting example. I mean, there's the whole like problem of untranslatability, the fact that like if the words pêche and orchid, like really, orchid is a really good one. Like I can hear it there. Pêche maybe less so, I don't know, unless, it's a homonym for sin. So maybe that's why she shivers. But yeah, I mean, there's a funny moment in the bus book, actually, which is not a work of translation, although it kind of is in a looser sense, because I myself feel that I'm perennially in translation between the two languages, where I'm listening to a podcast on France Inter, and I can't, I'm like not quite paying attention because I'm a little tired. So I can't tell if the podcast episode is about bees or abbeys. And I was very excited for that to happen in English, because in French it's les abeilles or les abeilles. Like the difference between bees and abbeys in French is like a slight syllable, abeille, abeille. Like it sounds almost the same. And so bees or abbeys, the fact that it's like such a they're two close words in English as well, that just delighted me. So yeah, I probably am translating or writing with an eye to how things sound, and I think that is partly obviously because I have studied literature and poetry very closely and hold that very close to my heart as a value, but also because French is a language where it's very important how things sound. And they'll tell you if you say something like that's conjugated incorrectly, or that if you say like ça fait joli, like it looks pretty outside, they'll say c'est pas français, like it's not French. So you can not just make a grammatical mistake but make a usage mistake, and it's apparently not the language anymore. And it's a language that like it has to sound good for it to have meaning. Even if something is like grammatically correct, it has the sound of it can be either infelicitous or great, and then you can say it.
Interesting. Do you accept that value? It sounds like the aesthetics of it please you, but I mean, it's also a little bit fascist, no? Or like intense.
Yeah. I think, so that goes back to what Sina was saying before about like structures and scaffolds. I think I feel comfortable when those are there, so that I have something to either hew toward or depart from. I think it doesn't bother me. I mean, it bothered me at the beginning. I was like, I want to say it looks pretty outside, ça fait joli. But like, I can do that now as a writer with her practice. But, when I was 20 years old, it was like, no, you're in a period of apprentissage, you're learning. So you have to do things right. So you have to learn the rules to break them, I guess.
It does come up here in dégueulasse. You use
yeah.
Have a little spit on dégueulasse.
Yeah.
And what is
dégueu? Like that does sound really vulgar, but like at first you can't hear that it sounds vulgar. You have to learn that vulgar sound.
Right. That's very interesting.
I think we're at 1 o'clock.
We are at 1 o'clock. We do have more to say, but it was really, what a pleasure.
To be continued.
Yes, I feel like I'm just getting warmed up to talk about
I know.
Wolf, who you said somewhere that doesn't matter what you start off writing, you always end up writing about Wolf.
It's true, definitely.
Is that true?
Art Monsters is supposed to be about like, sex and monstrosity in the 70s, and somehow the whole book is about Wolf's professions for women essay.
Yeah, great.
Okay, I can't help myself. Olga, do you have a question? Okay. Are you sure? Okay, if you can do it in like 30 seconds or less, can you tell us about monstrosity, like what your investment in that category is? The feminist monstrosity.
So it comes out of this Jenny Offal novel, Department of Speculation, where she says, I never meant to get married, I always wanted to be an art monster. And she doesn't say what that meant. So I've given myself the task of saying what that means to be an art monster. And so in a nutshell, it's surmounting ideas about femininity and how women are supposed to be, that can get in your way as an artist or a writer, and finding a way to, as Wolf says, in A Room of One's Own, break the sentence, break the sequence. So to monster the work, art monsters. It's not just the monster as a noun, it's a monster as a verb. So it's really trying to look at work that is that's visceral, that's trying to like make the reader or the writer feel something, or have some kind of shiver in reaction to the work, or basically taking up a kind of as a political feminist project of getting beyond abjection as an important kind of feminist mode of making art, and beyond the feminine grotesque towards a kind of aesthetics of touch, like reinvesting sensitivity in reinvesting the aesthetic with sensitivity and touch and texture.
But excesses of it that are monstrous somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really great. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thanks
Another
for-
time, I hope. Speak soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye. Bye, guys.
Bye.